Thanks everyone for listening. Have you ever thought that history is like incomplete? Like we're missing some pieces?
Yeah, definitely.
Well, today we're taking a closer look at the legacy of ancient Egypt, or Kemet, as it's sometimes called.
Oh, interesting.
Specifically, how appropriation and misrepresentation have impacted how we view it.
Right. It's not just about missing artifacts.
It's about like the whole story being manipulated.
Exactly, yeah.
To help us break this down, we're going to be looking at a YouTube video.
Okay.
It's by Sharri Plaza, and it's called The Stolen Kemetic Legacy Part 4.
I've heard of her, yeah.
She really digs into some of the ways the narrative around Kemet has been controlled, and it makes you think about how knowledge can be used for power.
Oh, absolutely. Knowledge is power.
So Plaza starts by talking about imperialistic ideologies and oppressive practices. And, well, this is where things get pretty intense.
Right.
European powers, they had this belief in their own cultural and racial superiority.
Right.
And that basically led them to feel like they were justified in taking control of Egypt's resources and knowledge.
Wow.
Like, did they even consider other perspectives?
Well, not really. What they did was they imposed this idea of Orientalism.
Okay.
They portrayed Kemet as this, like, exotic, mystical place.
Yeah, I've heard that before.
It wasn't about accuracy. It was about reinforcing their own dominance.
Right.
Like creating a narrative that suited them.
So instead of seeing all the amazing things about Kemet, like their advancements in math, astronomy, philosophy, they twisted it.
Right.
To fit their own ideas.
Exactly. This is classic Eurocentrism. European ideas at the center, everything else pushed aside.
It's shocking how this idea of a divine right of conquest played a role too.
Oh, yeah.
Like they thought God wanted them to rule over the Egyptian people and control their heritage.
Wow. It's incredible how these ideologies can be used to justify things that, looking back, are clearly wrong.
It's a good reminder to be critical of everything.
Definitely.
And this leads us right into the systematic looting and theft.
Oh, yeah, the stolen artifact.
It's mind-blowing, the scale of it.
Yeah.
Plaza really emphasizes just how much was taken. Not just a few things here and there, but a real effort to strip Kemet of its treasures.
A coordinated effort.
Napoleon's campaign in the late 1700s was a big turning point. That's when the Rosetta Stone ended up in France. And that was key for figuring out hieroglyphics.
Right, a stolen artifact to unlock their language.
And then, you know, throughout the 1800s and 1900s, you have these archaeological expeditions.
Sure.
Led mainly by the British. But Plaza says they were often just a cover for more looting.
Oh, wow.
She uses the example of the Temple of Dendera. They took tons of reliefs and carvings, many of which ended up in the British Museum.
So it wasn't just about getting knowledge for knowledge's sake. It was about control.
Yeah, exactly. Taking these objects really severed the connection between the Egyptian people and their heritage.
I see.
It's like trying to erase the memory of Kemet by scattering these pieces everywhere.
That's a powerful way to put it.
But they didn't stop there. They also went after the interpretation of Kemet's intellectual legacy.
Really? How so?
Even big names like Plato and Aristotle, while they acknowledged some Egyptian influence,
Right.
they still presented those ideas as just stepping stones to Greek thought.
Oh, I see.
Like downplaying the importance of Kemet's own unique knowledge.
That's fascinating because I've always wondered, didn't some Greek philosophers actually admire Egyptian knowledge? Weren't they like studying in Egypt?
Oh, that's a good point. But Plaza says that even admiration can still have an element of, you know, feeling superior.
Right.
By saying Egyptian knowledge was just a precursor to Greek thought, they wrote Kemet out of the bigger story of how ideas developed.
So instead of recognizing Kemet as its own source of knowledge.
Yeah, they made it like a footnote in this grand narrative of Western civilization.
That's how it happens, this subtle distortion.
It really is. And the impact of this is still felt today.
Yeah, but that makes me want to hear more about how this narrative has been challenged, how people are reclaiming it.
Yeah.
Because despite all this, the legacy of Kemet is strong.
That's where things get really interesting.
Okay, great.
Because even after centuries of misrepresentation, there's a fight to bring back the truth.
I'm ready to dive in. So now let's look at how these objects are shown, or maybe misrepresented, in Western museums. What do you think of when you picture a typical Egyptian exhibit?
It's almost always like dim lighting, maybe some dramatic music, trying to create this feeling of mystery.
Right. And while that can be visually interesting, it doesn't always do a good job of representing the culture accurately or respectfully. It's like those objects are just relics of some lost civilization, not part of a culture that's still alive.
Plaza argues that this just reinforces the whole colonial narrative. Like, it's saying, look what we have that you don't, instead of presenting a balanced and respectful understanding of the artifacts.
Right, and it contributes to this idea that ancient Egypt is something to be studied from afar, rather than something that's still relevant to people today.
Yeah, it's almost as if these museums are saying, we're the caretakers of this knowledge now, like taking away ownership from the people whose heritage it really is.
It's definitely a complex issue, but Plaza encourages us to be critical of these presentations. Don't just accept what you see. Do your own research. Look for different perspectives.
That takes us to the part of Plaza's work about the lasting legacy and reclamation efforts. And this is where things start to feel a bit more hopeful. There are people fighting to reclaim this heritage, to challenge those Eurocentric views.
It's a tough battle, but there's a growing movement to return these looted artifacts, to give back what was taken.
So it's not just about getting the objects back, but about taking back control of the narrative.
Exactly. Plaza highlights the work of organizations like the Black History Museum in London. They're working to decolonize museum practices, to center the voices of those whose stories have been marginalized.
That makes me think about the role of museums in all of this. Are they just places to store stolen goods, or can they be places where people can really learn and connect with different cultures?
It's a question a lot of institutions are asking themselves right now. Some are trying to be more transparent about where their collections came from, to work with communities of origin to create more accurate exhibits.
It sounds like a step in the right direction, but there's a lot more work to be done.
Definitely. But the fact that these conversations are happening is a positive sign. And Plaza emphasizes the importance of individual action, too. It's not just up to the museums.
What can listeners do to be more mindful of these issues? It feels like such a big problem.
Systemic change takes time, but we can all make a difference in our own way. Next time you're at a museum, don't just look at the objects. Think about where they came from, how they got there. Is the information complete? Is there another side to the story?
Be critical and be willing to dig a little deeper.
Right. And if something feels off, if you sense a bias, do some research. Look for other viewpoints. There are a lot of great scholars and activists who are trying to decolonize knowledge and reclaim these lost narratives.
Plaza talks about the need for a new kind of archaeology, one that's not just about digging up objects, but about uncovering the truth, understanding the power dynamics, the hidden stories.
That's a great way to put it. It's not just about the objects, it's about the stories we tell about them. Whose stories get told and how they're told really shapes how we understand the world.
This whole conversation has been eye-opening. I hadn't realized how much of what we learn about history is presented through a specific lens.
It's a good reminder that those who control knowledge have the power to control our perceptions.
So as we're wrapping up this deep dive into the stolen Kemetic legacy, what's the one thing you hope our listeners take away from this?
I hope they come away with a sense of curiosity and a willingness to question everything. The more we question the narratives we inherit, the closer we get to understanding the complexities of history.
It's like we need to become history detectives or something, really dig deep and look past the surface.
I like that. It really highlights how important context is. We can't just look at the present. We have to understand how the past, especially the injustices, got us here.
This has definitely made me think twice about the stuff I read and see. It's kind of scary how easy it is to twist a story, even if you don't mean to.
That's exactly why Plaza's work is so important, right? She wants us to be more than just passive readers or viewers. We have to be active. Think for ourselves.
Yeah, don't take everything at face value. Ask questions, see if there are other perspectives.
And that's powerful when you realize you have the ability to shape your own understanding. You don't have to just accept whatever you're given.
The more we question these narratives, the closer we get to the actual truth.
Exactly.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into the stolen Kemetic legacy, what's the one thing you really want our listeners to remember?
I'd say it's this. Never stop questioning and never stop learning. It's a journey, understanding the world. And you have to be critical and think for yourself along the way.
That's a great note to end on. And on that note, we'll leave you with this thought. What other legacies are hidden or misrepresented? What stories are still waiting to be told? Keep searching, keep asking those tough questions, and keep learning. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
Hey everyone, welcome back. We're diving deep today. And this one's kind of personal. We're looking at how looting those ancient Egyptian artifacts is really messed with African-American identity and history.
Yeah. definitely a heavy topic.
For sure. And our guide for this, well, it's a YouTube video, The Stolen #Kemetic Legacy Part 3 Tag 3D Animation by Sharri Plaza. We're going to try and unpack this whole idea of stolen history, what it means, how it shapes how we see things, and, what's being done to kind of set the record straight.
Right. I mean, when you think about it, these stolen artifacts, they're like physical connections to the past. And when they're gone, it's like a part of you is missing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's more than just missing stuff. The video brings up the Library of Alexandria. I mean, wow. Imagine all that knowledge, all those stories just gone. That's the kind of void we're talking about. It's kind of affect how people connect with their heritage.
Right. Absolutely. Big time. The video talks about this Kemetic legacy, Kemet, what the Egyptians called their civilization. And Plaza's point is that legacy, that rich history, has been kept from African Americans.
It's almost like getting a history book with all the important pages ripped out and then being told, this is it, this is the whole story.
Yeah, exactly. And the thing is, the video shows how the European version of Egyptian history, it often downplays or straight up erases the African roots.
Seriously?
Yeah, like in the 1800s, archaeologists, they'd say all these amazing Egyptian things that came from somewhere else, minimizing the whole idea of African ingenuity. It's wild. That kind of thinking, it really helped create this narrative that separated Egypt from the rest of Africa.
It's so frustrating how these messed up ideas have stuck around for so long. But you know what I'm curious about? What's being done to fight back? What stood out to you in the video about reclaiming this narrative?
The video really emphasizes the work that's going on by scholars, artists, and activists. They're doing the research, reinterpreting things, and really celebrating the African origins of ancient Egypt, taking back control of the story.
It's got to be about ownership, right?
Yeah.
Redefining who you are, not letting those limited narratives define you.
Totally. It's about recognizing a heritage that's so much bigger than historical oppression. Imagine realizing your history isn't just about slavery, but about a civilization that thrived thousands of years ago.
That's got to be powerful. Not just for individuals, but for whole communities. We are the stories we tell ourselves. This deep dive, this whole idea of the stolen Kemetic legacy, what does it tell us about the power of those stories?
It's a wake-up call, right? To look at the stories we've been told, see what's missing, seek out different points of view, ask yourself who benefits from a particular version of history, whose voices are heard and whose are silenced. It's important.
Heavy stuff.
Yeah.
A lot to think about. It's way more than just some missing stuff. It's history, identity, a feeling of belonging, all taken away. But as we've learned, there's this amazing movement to reclaim it, to write a new ending to the story.
Yeah, for sure. And it's not over, it's something we all can be a part of.
For real.
Yeah.
As we wrap up, think about this. How could knowing more about ancient African civilizations, how could that change or enrich how you see the world and your place in it? Something to ponder.
Definitely something to think about.
Catch you next time.
See ya.
Welcome to today's deep dive. We've gotten some really interesting stuff from you guys about ancient Kemet, ancient Egypt as it's often called. This whole idea of a stolen legacy has really gotten us thinking. So we're going to explore how Kemet and European civilizations interacted and maybe see if those interactions led to some appropriation of knowledge and artifacts and maybe even intellectual property.
Yeah, and we're going to kind of unpack how all that might still be affecting us today, We're talking cultural identity, education, even social justice movements.
Okay, so let's just dive right in. You sent us this really thought-provoking video.
Yeah.
About this idea of a stolen Kemetic legacy, and it really goes deep into how European civilizations might have taken knowledge, artifacts, intellectual property, straight from Kemet.
And the interesting thing is this isn't, just some ancient history lesson. It connects right to us today.
Yeah.
Have you ever thought about how we learn about history and how that might be shaped by who was in charge when that history was written down?
That is a great point. And this video, it highlights how during the Renaissance, European explorers, they were just obsessed with Kemet, wanted to know all its secrets. They wrote down everything they found, but they often didn't even bother to credit the original Kemetic sources. Can you imagine that?
It's pretty wild.
Scholars all over these ancient texts, taking notes and everything. And the original authors are just nameless.
It really makes you think about, the ethics of knowledge, doesn't it? Who gets to say they own knowledge? How do we respect where knowledge comes from? Especially when there's like a power imbalance going on.
This is where it gets so interesting. This video talks about Greek scholars during the Hellenistic period. That's when, Greek culture was everywhere after Alexander the Great. They did a ton of translating of hieroglyphics, and that opened up all this Kemetic knowledge to Europe. But it also makes you wonder about how things were interpreted.
Totally. Translation is never like a neutral thing. It's like when you tell a joke from one culture to another, sometimes it just doesn't land the same way. The translator's background is going to come through in how they interpret those ancient texts. And sometimes that strips away the original meaning,
Oh, absolutely. So much can get lost in translation.
Yeah.
Especially with ancient texts and big, complicated ideas.
For sure. And the video goes on to talk about how Kemetic thought influenced some of the biggest names in Western philosophy, like Plato. Have you heard about Plato's World of Forms? It's been shaping Western thought forever, but it might have actually been inspired by Kemetic ideas about the afterlife. We see those Kemetic ideas in Western philosophy, math, medicine, even astronomy. It kind of makes you wonder, how much of what we call Western knowledge actually came from Kemet, and how often do we even acknowledge that?
It's a really important question. I mean, it makes you want to go back and rethink everything you learned in school, doesn't it?
Absolutely. And the video also looks at the political situation in ancient Kemet, specifically how foreign powers, like the Ptolemaic dynasty, got involved. The Ptolemies, they were Greek, but they ruled Egypt for centuries. They took on some Egyptian customs, but they were still outsiders. And they often pushed native Egyptians to the side, both in government and in religion.
It's almost like they were, playing dress up with the culture. But at the same time, they were taking away power and traditions from the people who were actually from there.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. And it wasn't just about politics, it was about taking their culture. Greek and Roman scholars back then, they often took stuff from Kemetic philosophy and culture, but they never said where it came from. It's like taking something that isn't yours and saying, hey, I made this. And it happens even today,
All the time. And it's like this pattern keeps happening. European contributions get all the attention while Kemet gets pushed aside or even erased.
Exactly. And this silencing of Kemet, it had real consequences, especially when you look at what was happening with the economy. Ancient Kemet was rich, fertile land, tons of resources, a huge trade network, but all that wealth was systematically taken by foreign rulers.
It's like they treated Kemet as their own personal bank, just taking money out through heavy taxes and taking all their resources.
And that created a cycle of poverty for the people who actually lived there. Meanwhile, the conquerors got richer, and sadly we've seen this same pattern over and over again throughout history all over the world. It's
heartbreaking, and the video goes on to talk about how military conquest just made everything worse.
Yeah, and a lot of those military campaigns, they were all about control of Kemet's resources, and that's what led to the Kemetic people being dominated. Egyptians had to live under the rule of these foreign powers, and they lost so much of their independence and their cultural identity.
Imagine someone just invading your home and turning your whole life upside down. The trauma from those conquests must have been unimaginable.
It's hard to even wrap your head around it. And we can still see the effects of those military takeovers even today in how societies are structured, economic systems, even the political landscape.
It's all connected. The video also talks about how they stole artifacts. That was like the ultimate insult. All those countless Kemetic artifacts, giant statues, intricate jewelry, everything got looted and shipped off to European museums.
And a lot of times those artifacts were taken with zero consent. They didn't care about their cultural importance, They were just trophies to show off, stuck in glass cases, totally ripped from their original context.
It's like they stole a piece of their cultural identity. These objects were a part of Kemetic religion, their culture, their history, and now they're just things in a museum.
And because of that, a lot of people of African descent today feel a sense of loss, like they've been disconnected from their past. It's harder to connect with their ancestors when pieces of their history are missing. It's like someone stole your family photo album and now you can't trace your roots or understand where you come from.
The video then goes on to talk about how all these things from the past, they've shaped modern day problems, from cultural identity to biases in education.
It's like a ripple effect. The consequences of injustice, they just keep spreading outward and they affect us deeply in the present.
For example, because their heritage was exploited, it's made it harder for a lot of people of African descent to feel connected to their cultural identity. The way history's been told, downplaying Kemet and making Europe seem superior, has created this gap. It makes it tough to fully embrace their rich cultural heritage.
Exactly. It's like trying to build a house on a foundation that's all wobbly. Without a strong understanding of their history and where they come from, it's a real struggle to figure out who they are culturally and where they fit in.
And this lack of recognition, it's in our schools too. Eurocentric viewpoints are often the dominant ones. So we don't get a good understanding of how important Kemet was to global history.
That's so true. It's like reading a history book that's missing half the pages. Key voices and perspectives are just left out, and that creates a distorted and incomplete understanding of the past. And ultimately, it keeps biases alive and limits our understanding of how human civilizations are connected.
And the video makes another really interesting point. It says that the social and economic problems in regions that were once part of Kemet, they can be traced back to this long history of exploitation.
Yeah, the lasting effects of colonialism, economic exploitation, and being pushed to the margins politically. They've all contributed to the struggles that many of these regions are dealing with today. Poverty, not enough education or healthcare, and constant political instability. They all have roots in the past.
It makes you realize that injustice has consequences that can last for generations. It's not just about something that happened a long time ago. It's shaping what's happening now and what will happen in the future.
And that's exactly why understanding this history is so important. We need to acknowledge the wrongs of the past so we can work toward a future that's fairer and more just for everyone.
Wow, it feels like we're just scratching the surface here, you know?
Yeah.
This video you shared, it really emphasizes how deeply this exploitation affected Kemet. I mean, everything. Their politics, people's daily lives. And it specifically mentions this Ptolemaic dynasty, which they were Greek, right, but ruled Egypt for centuries.
Yeah, and it's important to remember, even though they adopted some Egyptian customs, they still ruled as outsiders, and they often sidelined native Egyptians, both in how they governed and in religious matters.
So it wasn't a true, mixing of cultures, more like picking and choosing what they liked while still holding on to power and their own traditions.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. And it went beyond just politics. Greek and Roman scholars during that time, they often took things from Kemetic philosophy and culture, but never gave credit where it was due. It's like taking someone's recipe, changing it a bit, then saying you invented the dish.
Perfect analogy. Makes you wonder how much of what we think of as Western thought actually originated in Kemet, and how often do we even think about that connection?
It's a good question. The video also points to how the economy was exploited, and that was a big part of Kemet's decline. Kemet was incredibly wealthy, fertile land, tons of resources, this sophisticated trade network. But all that wealth was systematically drained away by foreign rulers, which made the local population poorer while the conquerors got richer.
Such a classic pattern throughout history, unfortunately. But what about military conquest? What kind of impact did that have on the people of Kemet?
Well, a lot of those military campaigns were driven by wanting to control Kemet's resources, and that led to the subjugation of its people. They lost a lot of their independence and cultural identity because they were forced to adapt to the rule of these foreign powers.
That had to be devastating. It's like having your home invaded and your whole way of life completely upended.
The trauma of those conquests must have been immense, and we can actually still see the ripple effects of those military takeovers today in social structures, in economic systems, even in the political landscape.
It's all connected. And the video also brings up the theft of artifacts, which feels like a real slap in the face. Countless Kemetic artifacts were stolen, everything from huge statues to intricate jewelry, and shipped off to European museums. It's like robbing a culture of its tangible history.
Yeah, and often those artifacts were taken without any consent or regard for their cultural significance. They became these trophies to display in museums and glass cases, completely removed from their original meaning and context. And because of that, a lot of people of African descent today feel this sense of loss and disconnection from their past.
It's like if someone stole your family photo album. You lose those visual reminders of your history, that connection to the past.
Exactly. And the video goes on to talk about how those events from history have shaped the problems we see today. Everything from how people see their own cultural identity to biases in education. It's like this ripple effect where the consequences of injustice just keep spreading.
One of the things that really stuck with me was how it's impacted cultural identity.
Wow.
Because history has often downplayed Kemet's achievements and emphasized how great Europe was, a lot of people of African descent feel disconnected. It makes it so much harder to embrace their rich cultural heritage.
Yeah, that's a really powerful insight. It's like trying to build a house on a foundation that isn't stable.
Yeah.
If you don't have a strong understanding of your history and where you come from, figuring out your cultural identity and where you belong becomes a real struggle.
And that lack of recognition extends to our schools, too, you know? We often see this very Eurocentric point of view, which means we don't get a good understanding of how important Kemet was in the world.
It's true. It's like reading a history book that's missing half the pages. We're missing those important voices and perspectives, and that gives us a distorted view of the past, a really incomplete understanding. And in the end, it allows biases to continue, and it limits our understanding of how human civilizations are all connected.
The video also makes this connection between social and economic inequality in places that were once part of Kemet and this long history of exploitation.
Yeah, the effects of colonialism, economic exploitation, and being pushed to the side politically, they've all lasted a long time. And those things have contributed to a lot of the struggles these regions are dealing with today. Things like poverty, lack of access to education and healthcare, and constant political instability. These all have roots in the past.
It's a real wake-up call. Injustice has consequences that last for generations. It's not just something that happened a long time ago, it's shaping what's happening now and what will happen in the future. But in the middle of all this, the video talks about something hopeful. There's this growing movement to return stolen artifacts to their countries of origin.
And that movement is about more than just getting objects back. It's about restoring cultural heritage, acknowledging the injustices of the past, and empowering communities to reconnect with their ancestral legacies.
I love that. It's like giving a stolen heirloom back to the rightful owner. It's an act of recognition, respect, and reconciliation.
It is. It's a step toward healing the wounds of the past, allowing communities to reclaim their narratives and celebrate their cultural heritage on their own terms.
And that movement is gaining traction all over the world. More and more, museums and institutions are facing pressure to consider the ethics of holding on to artifacts that were acquired through colonialism.
It's complicated, for sure. There are legal and logistical challenges. But the heart of the matter is recognizing the injustices of the past and working towards a more equitable and respectful relationship between cultures.
It reminds us that history isn't just something we read about in books. It's a living thing that shapes our present and our future. It affects how we see the world, how we understand each other, and how we move forward as a global community.
You know, it's amazing how even when a culture has been exploited, oppressed, that spirit, it still finds a way to survive. And the video you sent, it shows how much the world is starting to understand what Kemet gave to us.
It really is like this wildfire, this knowledge, this rediscovery. It's spreading everywhere. It's so inspiring to see people challenging those old Eurocentric stories.
Yeah.
And highlighting how rich and complex Kemetic history is. The philosophy, the spirituality, all of it.
Yeah. It reminds us that history is never set in stone, right? We make new discoveries, we question old assumptions, and our understanding of the past, it just keeps getting deeper. And a lot of the scholars leading this movement, they're of African heritage, you know?
Yeah.
They're bringing these fresh perspectives and insights that we haven't heard before.
It's like you're taking this old tapestry that's faded with time, and they're bringing these vibrant new colors back to it. They're helping us see the whole picture, the complete story. We can finally appreciate how beautiful and deep Kemet's legacy really is.
And this renewed interest in Kemet, it's making people more aware of African history in general. It's making them question the stories they've been told and look for more inclusive, more accurate versions of the past.
Yeah, it's like a whole new world of knowledge and perspectives is opening up. Like we're being invited to step outside of what we're used to and embrace the incredible diversity and richness of human history.
And that shift in perspective, that's a key part of building a future that's more just, more equitable. When we acknowledge what all civilizations have contributed, we can start to create a more balanced and accurate understanding of our shared story as humans.
Yeah, it's like recognizing that human history isn't this single straight line. It's more like a tapestry woven from all these different threads. Each one is beautiful and important in its own way.
And by understanding how those threads are all connected, we can really appreciate how rich and complex the human experience truly is. The story of Kemet, it's a powerful reminder that history isn't just dates and names. It's about who had the power, different ways of seeing the world, and the legacy, the inheritance we're left with.
I know for me, this deep dive has really made me think critically about where my knowledge comes from and the stories I've been told. It's made me want to learn more, dig deeper, and find those voices and perspectives that have been missing for so long.
That's the best part about learning. It's a lifelong journey. It never ends. The more we discover about the past, the better we can understand our present and create the future we want.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into the stolen legacy of Kemet, we want to leave you with some things to think about. What really resonated with you today? Did we challenge any assumptions you had? And what will you do to keep exploring the rich tapestry of history?
Keep those questions coming.